Roster moves, roster moves, roster moves. Who could the Jets trade for? Who's making the team? We'll discuss on today's Mailbag episode of the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, this is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Wednesday, August 10th, 2022, and I'm your host, John B. from GettingGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch every day. We are free and we are available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you like what you see or hear, hit that subscribe button wherever you're watching or listening. You'll never miss an episode. If you're watching on YouTube, please give the episode a big thumbs up. Helps the channel out and it helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Well, today we have our weekly mailbag. Each Wednesday we try and do a mailbag show. Sometimes the schedule forces us to move it to a different day, but most weeks Wednesday will be our mailbag show. We are full of listener questions today. I'll get to as many as I can. We begin with a question from Kevin, a longtime listener. Great to hear from Kevin. It's been a while. What do you think of the Jets trading next year's first or second round pick for a top veteran right tackle? It's time to win some games. We've had 5 first rounders the last 2 years. And that last part is a key point to make. 5 first-round picks in the last 2 years. Now, if you're a longtime listener of the podcast, you know how much I believe in holding on to draft picks. You know how hesitant I am, and under most circumstances, to part with the draft pick. It's the way the NFL works. Really tough to build a team in free agency in the NFL because you're bidding against everybody else. You're not going to get good value, and we have a salary cap. We have a hard cap in the NFL, so you're spending big money in free agency. You're not going to get great value. It's tough to fill all of your needs. Whereas if you hit on a draft pick, those players are cost controlled. You hit on a draft pick, that player's going to be a bargain. And if you hit on enough draft picks, then you're going to build yourself a really good team. So with all this said, usually I'm against the idea of trading picks for players, with some exceptions. This is an exception, though, and one of the key points is 5 first-round picks the last 2 years. So the Jets, if they've hit on these picks, and who knows whether they've hit on these picks, but if they've hit on these picks, they have that cost-controlled talent. They have 5 years worth of cost-controlled talent because you've got 5 first-round picks the last 2 years. So it buys you a little bit of room to play around with your draft picks. I think it gives you an opening if there's a veteran, proven player who can help your ball club out. You're not hurting as much because you still have that cost-controlled talent on your team. Now, the question was a top right tackle. And absolutely, listen, if there's a top right tackle, Pro Bowl kind of guy, I'm not hesitating to give up a first or a second-round pick, depending on who it is. It always comes down to who it is. The issue that I see, though, is I don't know who that player is. There have been some rumors maybe Titus Howard in Houston could be available. That's been around for months. But this is a tough time of year to need a tackle. Occasionally you'll get like a late camp cut, like somebody's just not meshing with his coaching staff, and the team may want to save money, and sometimes an offensive lineman shakes free this time of year who's good, but it's a tough time because offensive line play is really hard to find in this league. And if you got it, it's really tough to get a team to give it up. So it's a complicated question. Hypothetically, if that guy was available, absolutely, because it's such an important position. It's the type of player who's going to help Zach Wilson out. It's the type of player who's going to help Breece Hall and Michael Carter out in the run game. I mean, it's a premium position. I think for a premium position, you absolutely, if you're the Jets, you give up a pick. And as you said, I mean, Jets got to start winning some games here. I'm not saying the Jets have to be a playoff team this year, but we're past the point where we can just dismiss bad records as the Jets rebuilding. The Jets got to win some games this year. And not only that, Zach Wilson's got to develop. So if you could get a quality right tackle, a guy who's proven a top-end tackle, yeah, I would give up that pick, or give up an early pick, first or a second rounder. My only question is, who is it? The rumor, there are plenty of players on the trade block. There just aren't many tackles right now. It's a tough time to need a tackle. So it's a long way of saying, yes, if that guy was available. I'm not sure that guy's available, though. Now, our next question is also about the tackle position. What would you say about the Jets possibly calling the Eagles about trading for Andre Dillard? Douglas knows him well. He was responsible for drafting him in the first round a couple of years ago. And what do you think the Eagles would want for Dillard? This is a complex question because Dillard does not fit the description of a top right tackle. In fact, Dillard's been a draft disappointment. You could argue a draft bust pretty easily. And yes, Douglas did draft him a few years back, and maybe Douglas still likes him. You see this all the time in the NFL. Guys fall in love with prospects in the draft, and even when they struggle, guys don't fall out of love with these prospects. Do I think Dillard is better than Chuma Edoga? Do I think Dillard is better than Connor McDermott? Do I think Dillard is probably better than Max Mitchell? Max Mitchell's been getting some buzz the last couple days from the Jets coaching staff. They've been trying to talk him up. Conceivably. Last year, for the first time, Dillard got some playing time, and actually, it was not the first time he got playing time, but it's the first time he actually looked kind of credible. Do I like Dillard so much better than those guys that I give up something good? Probably not. I feel like, if Philly was willing to give him away for like a 5 or a 6, would I take him? Yeah. Would I be willing to give up a pick earlier, a pick in the range of like round 3, round 4, where you actually have a reasonable shot at getting a good player? I don't know that the upgrade is really enough from over what you've got. I mean, Dillard's really a marginal upgrade, I think. He really has been a disappointment in his career. He's not even a starter for the Eagles. Now, part of that is you've had some guys emerge. You still have Lane Johnson there. You've had some guys step up for Philly, but I don't think he's good enough. The problem it's kind of the catch-22 of the situation. You want a quality tackle, but if a tackle's available to you, he's probably not a quality tackle. It's what makes this spot so tough for the Jets, I think. They need a tackle. It's just there aren't that many that are available right now. So I just think it's a tough spot. Our next question, also about the right tackle position. It's no surprise we're getting lots of right tackle mailbag questions this week with Mekhi Becton's injury. Hindsight is 20/20, but do you think the fact that Becton's injury and recovery of his right knee from last year should have been a factor in the right tackle, left tackle competition? As a right tackle, his right leg, right knee became his primary plant leg, and maybe that was doing too much too fast. I think the Jets probably considered all factors here. In fact, I've heard there's another theory out there that was one of the reasons they moved him to right tackle, because they felt like he was using, you use your left leg first at right tackle. It's difficult to say. I feel like the Jets probably did consider that, though. I think the Jets probably did everything they could, at least in their minds, to help Becton along in his recovery. It just really did not happen. Next question: given that both Becton and Fant were coming back from injuries, do you think the Jets should have picked Ekwonu or Neal over Sauce Gardner? I don't, because I think Sauce was the better long-term prospect, but that meant I accepted the risk that the tackle position could be a weakness in 22, which could have a ripple effect. I never think you draft for immediate need. Most of the time, I don't think you draft for immediate need. I think you have to view the draft as a long-term prospect. I say this all the time heading into the draft season. Do you remember 10 years ago what the Jets' draft needs were? Do you remember whether the Jets' draft picks 10 years ago addressed their needs? Probably not. You probably just remember whether the player was good or not, because needs change from year to year. What you're trying to find is top-end talent. You're trying to find the top-end talent that prevents a position from becoming a need over the long haul. There's always this obsession over what the needs are. Picks are always graded about whether the need was addressed or not. But at the end of the day, you don't care. You just care about whether the guy was good or not, because ultimately, your needs change from year to year. Performance in the NFL, for most players, is very up or down from season to season. So if you find a guy who's a stalwart player for you, who can lock down a position for a decade, you're not going to care. 10 years from now, we're not going to remember that the Jets drafted Sauce Gardner over these linemen, and we're not going to remember what happened with Mekhi Becton. We'll remember whether Sauce Gardner was good or not. And ultimately, if Sauce Gardner is as good as advertised, and you never know, even though he's a top pick, some top picks don't pan out. Everybody, when they pick a guy in the top 5, thinks that they're going to be a superstar, and it doesn't always work out. But at the end of the day, if Sauce Gardner is a shutdown corner for this team, that's a big deal. And, we're talking needs. I understand corner may not have been that big of a need because they signed DJ Reed and they had Bryce Hall, but the Jets' defense was awful last year. And they did not have a guy who was like a shutdown corner last year. And that was part of the problem. It wasn't the biggest problem, but it was part of the problem. And this was the challenge the Jets had heading into the draft, because you had to strike the balance. First of all, you want to build around Zach Wilson. You want to make sure he has quality pieces around him. You want to make sure that the supporting cast is good. You want to make sure he has a good line. You want to make sure he has a good receiving core. But you also have to fix the defense, because the defense was dreadful last year. And if you don't fix the defense, you're telling Zach Wilson you got to score 35 points a game to win, that's not putting Zach Wilson in a good spot. So it's tough to say. I don't know how confident they were in Becton. I'm not sure that the Jets picking Gardner was necessarily a sign that they were completely confident in Becton. The only thing I'd say is that if they took Quan or Neal, that was a clear sign they had zero confidence in Becton. It could be that they just thought Gardner was an out-of-this-world prospect, and we don't know what they thought of Ekwonu or Neal. We don't. It's possible those guys were not viewed as good prospects. It's possible they don't pan out. So it's really tough to draft for need. Sometimes you do it. Like, I thought the Jets had to take a receiver at 10, so I guess I can't say you never draft for need. The Jets had to get Zach Wilson another receiver this year, and clearly they rolled the dice with Becton. They thought they were going to be able to get a full season out of him. They thought it was worth the roll of the dice, and it did not pan out, and now they have to figure it out. But I'm not going to look back on this and say that they should have picked somebody else for an immediate need. I think at the end of the day, if Sauce Gardner is a guy who makes an all-pro team, a guy who's a perennial Pro Bowler, that's a big if. But if he is, everybody's going to view that as a successful pick. Nobody's going to look back on that and say it was a bad pick. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about a player who was a good pick for another team. It's a player who could be on the trade block. It's Roquan Smith from Chicago. Should the Jets be interested? I'll tell you what I think as we continue on this Wednesday mailbag. It's tough to believe, but the preseason begins in just 2 days. The Jets play the Eagles Friday night, and that means that the start of the regular season is just a couple weeks away. And BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check on all your betting needs if you want to lay some money down on the regular season. You can find all of your favorite sports and events at the #1 source for online odds, lines, and games. You can find reviews and news of every league. That includes Major League Baseball, it includes the NBA, the NHL, combat sports, esports, golf, and yes, indeed, the NFL. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all of your sports wagering information. From live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts, they have you covered. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today. BetOnline, where the game starts. Thank you again for making Locked On Jets your first listen or your first watch every day. We're free and available on all platforms. We continue with our weekly mailbag show. Our next question: should the Jets make a move for a Bear All-Pro linebacker who wants out? I think if Roquan Smith is available, the Jets should be a team that makes a move for him. Listen, they need a linebacker. I think Roquan Smith would be a really good fit for the system, the Robert Sala, Jeff Ulbrich defensive system. What the irony is, when Mike McCagnon was the GM, he was obsessed with bringing in linebackers, and he had coaches in Todd Bowles and Greg Williams, where linebacker really wasn't a priority. Greg Williams' first year, the Jets were playing Neville Hewitt most of the time, not due to injury, but they got away with playing Neville Hewitt most of the time in Greg Williams' system, and they still had a pretty good defense that year. Now we've got Robert Sala and Jeff Ulbrich. Linebacker is an important position in this defense. They need a guy who can cover ground. I think Roquan Smith would be a really good fit. And I go back to what I said earlier. Jets are in a position, unlike where they've been in the past, where there is a stable of young, cost-controlled talent on this team, and that means you can be a little bit more aggressive in moving some picks for some veteran players. And Roquan Smith's not that old either. So, I mean, he still fits a timeline that's focused on the long run. It's not like you're getting him as a one-year rental and you're just trying to go all in. And Roquan Smith could be a player for a long time. And, the salary cap, we've seen this in the league. For high-end talent, you can always afford another high-end player. In fact, something? There's been rumors the Jets are going to have to restructure deals if they want to get Dwayne Brown, because now there's rumors Dwayne Brown's going to cost $10 million. I'd much rather restructure if I have to restructure deals, I'd rather it be for a great player like a Roquan Smith. So I would be interested in him. I think clearly the Jets could use the linebacker help. And this is a team, and this goes back to my point, is that now the linebacker's at a premium, and we got Quincy Williams, who did well last year, but still a waiver wire pickup. C.J. Mosley, a guy who's a holdover because his contract is so ridiculous. Quan Alexander, an August signing. Now we have a system where linebacker play is actually kind of important, and we don't really have linebackers. So I think it would be I would be interested in Roquan Smith if he's available. And of course, the caveat is that for every 100 players, there are trade rumors about, like, one of them actually gets traded. So I don't know if it's going to happen, but if he's available, I think the Jets should be interested. I don't have any issue with that. Our next question: did Quan take Quincy Williams' job as the second linebacker? I don't think so. I think the Jets really like Quincy Williams. Now, I think the Jets like Quincy Williams a lot more than I like Quincy Williams. And nothing against Quincy Williams. I mean, listen, by all accounts, Quincy Williams has vastly outperformed anything you would expect from a linebacker claimed off waivers. Not just a linebacker claimed off waivers. Linebacker claimed off waivers from the Jaguars. One of the few teams that's been worse than the Jets the last couple of years. From the Jaguars. This guy wasn't good enough to be on the Jaguars. The Jets got him. He's a downhill player, hits hard, has his moments against the run, got speed. I think the Jets like him a little bit too much. Maybe he's got some untapped potential. I don't know. He's young enough that conceivably he could improve. But I think the Jets really like him. Quan Alexander, I think, was brought in more as the third linebacker. And in today's NFL, even though people will tell you the Jets play a 4-3 defense, your third linebacker in the Sala all-brick system is really a part-time player, because in today's NFL, you're facing 3 receiver sets most of the time. Really, your base defense is the defense with 5 defensive backs on the field, and the guy who comes off the field in this system is going to be the third linebacker. So I think they got Quan Alexander as more insurance for that Nasruddin Sherwood role, where you don't really trust these young converted safeties. They think maybe Quan Alexander can play that role a little bit better, and he's got versatility. I mean, I think he can play the Will, he can play the Sam in case there's an injury to Quincy Williams. Then he'd step in. But I don't think that he's brought in to replace Quincy Williams. Should he be? I mean, I don't know. I think they're probably roughly equal. I think that the Jets really like Quincy Williams, though. So I think that Quincy Williams is going to keep his starting job. Our next question: what are your thoughts on Brandon Shell being brought in as a left tackle? Brandon Shell's a free agent right now. I would not bring him in as left tackle. I don't think he's ever played left tackle. I don't think he's got the movement skills to play left tackle. I've heard worse ideas for right tackle, though. I mean, honestly, I was never a huge Brandon Shell guy. And, I don't really love how the Jets keep bringing in these Seattle linemen. That hasn't really worked out that well for him. But, maybe he'd be better than what the Jets have. So maybe as a right tackle, I don't see Brandon Shell, though, fixing the Jets at left. I'm assuming the question actually meant Brandon Shell as a right tackle, and I guess there are worse ideas, but you're at the point of the year where there probably are players who are upgrades on what the Jets have right now. It's just none of them are going to be that great. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we will close out our weekly mailbag. Among the topics we'll discuss: who will make the team in a loaded defensive end position. I'll tell you what I think as we finish up this Wednesday mailbag. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Wednesday mailbag show. We continue our next question: who do you see being the odd man out on the defensive line logjam? Which of Jabari Zuniga, Vinny Curry, Tim Ward, or Michael Clemens don't make the roster? All right, I'll take you through the order, I think, in terms of likelihood of making the roster. I think Michael Clemens, is a lock. They drafted him in the 4th round. You have to be exceptionally bad. You have to be Jalen Saunders bad to not make the team as a 4th round pick. Jalen Saunders actually made the Jets, so I shouldn't even say that. He was a wide receiver in that disaster Idzik draft class in 2014. The very undersized receiver. Jets got him as a punt returner. He couldn't catch punts. Got cut very quickly. He actually made the team. So if Jalen Saunders makes the team, I think any 4th round pick's probably going to make the team. I think Michael Clemens is a lock, so he's going to be on the team. I think Vinny Curry is a guy they'd like to see on the team. I think they like his locker room leadership. Last year, I get the feeling the Jets realized they probably went a little bit too young. The Jets went with the youth movement last year. They had the youngest roster in the league, and you saw that there were some issues, both in terms of just on-field play, but also maybe in terms of experience. The Jets had a lot of awful starts last year, where maybe some young guys could not get settled down. So I think as much as anything, maybe they brought in some veteran leadership just to keep guys calm on the sidelines early in games. I think they like his leadership. Maybe he still has something left in the tank. So I think Vinny Curry is the second most likely to make it. Zuniga, I think a guy the Jets are ready to give up on because they cut him last year, and he's stuck on the practice squad for much of the season. He's apparently having a pretty strong camp, and this is kind of a make-or-break year for him, but I think he could be the odd man out. I think, though, Tim Ward doesn't really have a lot to stake his claim to. He had a few good snaps last year. I think of the four, if you're asking me which is the least likely, it's Tim Ward. I think Zuniga is the second most likely to be cut. I think Curry is the third most likely, and I think Michael Clemens is going to be on the team. I'd be surprised if Michael Clemens was not on the team. And our last question, John, I started the offseason very excited about the offensive line. With the injury to Becton, I feel like we were dangerously close to reverting back to a below-average line. Do you think George Fant can play at a high enough level to really anchor the line? Well, he has to now, and there's more pressure on George Fant than there was in the past. I feel like you can get away with one really bad offensive lineman. That's how I feel. You can give help, especially with all the investments at the tight end position. You can have a tight end next to whoever's playing right tackle. You can use the backs to chip as they go out on passing routes. There are things you can do to plug a hole at one spot on the offensive line. You cannot survive two bad offensive linemen. So, on paper, the Jets still have four credible linemen. Fant is one of them. Laken Tomlinson's another. Connor McGovern's really solid player. He's the guy I have the most confidence in. And Elijah Vera Tucker's got to grow. He's got to develop this year. And Elijah Vera Tucker's going to have to help whoever's playing right tackle. In an ideal world, you'd like the second-year guy to have help of his own. You'd like somebody to help the second-year guy develop. But Elijah Vera Tucker is now going to have to probably provide some more help for that right tackle. So if you have these four guys holding up, then yeah, you can work around. You can kind of scheme around to a certain extent a guy who's a problem at one of the spots. But it just puts more pressure on Fant. And one of the issues is that Fant got a lot of help last year, and he's not going to be able to get as much help this year unless the Jets make a big-time move. Unless that great tackle who I was talking about at the top of the show, who I have no idea who it is, unless the Jets are able to get that guy, Fant is going to have more on his plate. Fant's going to have to play better this year just to probably keep at the same level of play, because the Jets are going to have to send more help to the right tackle, and they're not going to be able to send as much help to George Fant. That's last year they were fortunate enough to have Morgan Moses, and I can't get on them for not keeping Morgan Moses because Morgan Moses wanted to start. Last year they kind of lucked into Morgan Moses. It was I think people make it really. I think sometimes when the Jets don't get a player, people try and rationalize and they try and claim that the Jets never could have gotten a player, and that's not true. I think in the case of Morgan Moses, he was going to be a very difficult guy to keep unless they traded either Fant or Becton. I don't think they were going to trade Becton, and if they traded Fant, you'd still be in the spot because you have Morgan Moses and you have another hole on the offensive line. So I know there's a lot of criticism for not keeping Morgan Moses, but I think he would have been tough to keep. It leaves the Jets in a tough spot, though, and I think that they can survive it, and I think part of it's Breece Hall. He's a big back. I don't think he's necessarily going to need great blocking to thrive, and I think you still have a lot of strong run blockers on this team, especially up the middle, but it's going to require Fant to play really well. Fant's going to have to continue to play well. As I said, I think he's going to have to play better this year than he did last year. Anyway, that's all for our show today. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Big shout out to subscribers to the show, and to join that group, just hit the subscribe button wherever you are watching or listening. Please, if you're listening on a podcast source, please give the show a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, please, big thumbs up. Helps the channel out. Helps other Jets fans find the channel. Have a great Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.